Furstenberg, Barcelona was an ancient lineage in which strict codes have evolved. If a female member of the family wished to possess full privilege, if she would someday be queen, then she must neither marry nor mother before the age of 21, nor could she before that age forsake her parents' domicile. And although she considered herself one of the people, Lee Cherie did very much indeed desire full royal privilege. Lee Cherie believed that she could use that privilege to help the world. Fairy tales and myths are dominated by accounts of rescued princesses, she reasoned. Isn't it about time that a princess returned the favor? Lee Cherie had a vision of the princess as hero. As Queen Tilly put it when Max asked her what she thought their only daughter wanted out of life, "She wants to buy the world Coke." "What?" "She wants to buy the world Coke." "Well," said Max, "she can't afford it. And the world would demand a Diet Pepsi anyhow. Why doesn't she buy me a martini instead?" 11. It was autumn, the springtime of death. Rain spattered across the rotting leaves, and a wild wind wailed. Death was singing in the shower. Death was happy to be alive. The fetus bailed out without a parachute. It landed on the sideline astroturf, so upsetting the cheerleaders that for the remainder of the afternoon their rahs were little more than squeaks. The Huskies won anyway, knocking off favored UCLA 28-21 at a nearby university hospital. And at a nearby university hospital where Lee Cherie had to have a pint of common blood pumped into her royal conduits, the interns were in a festive mood. Lee Cherie's dilemma was resolved for the time being, but she felt like a black candle at a wake for a snake. When an intern whistled Proud Mary, she had no inclination to sing along. Her boyfriend telephoned about 8 that evening. He was at his fraternity house. They were having a victory party. He said he'd drop by the hospital the next day, but he must have lost the address. When her identity was learned, the princess was moved to a private room. She was given the best sedative in the house, Chateau du Phenobarbital, 1979. Asleep at last, she dreamed of the fetus. In her dream, the fetus was toddling off down some awkward dirt road like Charlie Chaplin at the end of a silent movie. By Tuesday, she was physically recovered to the degree that she could return to campus, where she learned that her status as the only genuine princess west of New York was insufficient to deflect the moral indignation of the committee of cheerleaders. Asked to resign from the Yell Squad, she resigned from classes as well. She also resigned from men, but rather late to appease the king and queen. Max's heart was rattling like a full set of dishes when he told Lee Cherie that she must shape up or ship out. "We've been liberal with you," said Max, "because, well, after all, this is America." Max neglected to point out that it was also the last quarter of the 20th century, but that, no doubt, was self-evident. Adolf Hitler was a vegetarian, Queen Tilly reminded Lee Cherie for the 100th time. Tilly was attempting to discourage her daughter from joining a natural foods commune in Hawaii, an option that appeared to be open to her if she elected to relinquish royal privilege. In turn, Lee Cherie might have reminded the Queen that Hitler ate 2 pounds of chocolate a day, but she'd grown weary of that dietary debate. Besides, she decided to protect her claim on royal privilege, even though it meant subjecting herself to tighter social restrictions. "You gon' be a good girl, then?" "Yes, mother." "If we deal you a new hand, will you play by the rules?" "Yes, father." They observed her as she turned to go upstairs. They observed her as if it were the first time they'd really looked at her in years. Despite her pale color and the unhappiness that clung to her the way a bad dream clings to a rumpled pillowcase, she was lovely. Her hair, straight and red as ironed ketchup, rode gravity's one-way ticket all the way to her waist. Her blue eyes were as soft and moist as huevos rancheros, and the long curl of their lashes caused fimbrilet shadows to fall on the swell of her cheeks. She was not tall, yet the legs that hung out of her skirt seemed a tall woman's legs, and beneath her "No Nukes is Good Nukes" t-shirt, her astonishingly round breast jiggled ever so slightly. like balls balanced on the noses of Valium-eating seals. Wow. Tilly stroked her chihuahua. Max's heart made a sound like sleigh bells on Mrs. Santa Claus's dildo. 12. Neoteny. Oh, how the Remington SL3 enjoys that word. Unrestrained, it will fill the page with neoteny. Of course, it bothers the Remington SL3 that not a comma's worth of that very few readers know what the word means. Given an opportunity to write it again, however, the machine would be inclined toward definition. Neoteny is remaining young, and it may be ironic that it is so little known because human evolution has been dominated by it. Humans have evolved their relatively high state by retaining the immature characteristics of their ancestors. Humans are the most advanced of mammals, although a case can be made for the dolphins because they seldom grow up. Behavioral traits such as curiosity about the world, flexibility of response, and playfulness are common to practically all young mammals, but are usually rapidly lost with the onset of maturity in all but humans. Humanity has advanced when it has advanced, not because it has been sober, responsible, and cautious, but because it has been playful, rebellious, and immature. One needn't feel excessively ignorant if one was unfamiliar with neoteny. There have been queens and kings and princesses who also were oblivious to it in word and action. During the period following Lee Cherie's miscarriage, the supposed virtue of maturity was cardinal in the Puget Sound Palace. Although understandably vague about what maturity might actually be, Lee Cherie strove with her parents' encouragement to acquire more of it. Nightly until the age of 15, and on a few evenings thereafter, she had been told a bedtime story. Until a few weeks prior, she had been flailing about paroxysmally amidst pompons, shouting incomprehensible incantations meant to further the fortunes of a band of innocent sprites worshipping a sacred fruit. Upon the fortunes of that same football team habitually rode much of mature King Max's bank account, but that's another matter. It was about time she grew up. Princesses were not exactly a dime a dozen. And this princess, it had suddenly dawned upon Tilly and Max, was a sex pot. A sex pot. She might be expected, upon attaining the age of 21, to marry well, very well indeed. In fact, there was probably no man, from Prince Charles to the U.S. President's son, whom she might not fairly mate. Those prospects pleased the king and queen, heretofore living under the stare of the CIA, having agreed to retire, that's in quotes, retire, from the royalty circuit. The Furstenberg Barcelonas sheltered no particular ambitions for their daughter and were content to have her indulge in normal American girlhood, although they were unconvinced that developments such as vegetarian and ecology were normal. Now, it occurred to them that if this young woman were to attract the attention of the right man, one of the emerging Arab rulers, for example, even the CIA probably would be powerless to prevent a most propitious union. It was the wrong time to speak of marriage to Lee Cherie. Lee Cherie had driven a wooden stake through the Valentine. Yet on the premise that it would aid preparation for her mission in life, on the premise that were she ever to resume her studies in environmental sciences, she might not be so easily distracted by vibrations from the half shellfish, half peach that occupied the warm, watery bowl of her lower regions. Hang on just a second. She might not be so easily distracted by vibrations from the half shellfish, half peach that occupied the warm, watery bowl of her lower regions. She made herself available to maturation, if maturation would have her. Put away was her teddy bear. Put away were her Beach Boys records. Put away was her fantasy of a Hawaiian honeymoon with Ralph Nader. Her daydream of Ralph and her driving off together into the Haleakala sunset with their seatbelts fastened. Not that she'd changed her mind about how perfect she'd be for him. He worked too hard, smiled too little, and dined as one indifferent to both flavor and fate. He clearly was a hero in need of rescue by a princess. It was just that romantic fantasies were immature. Lee Cherie read books on solar radiation. She perused papers on overpopulation. To keep abreast of current events, she watched every news telecast that she could, fleeing the TV room immediately whenever a love story was dramatized. She gave her ears to Mozart, Vivaldi. Tchaikovsky was painful. She fed flies to Prince Charming, and she worked at keeping her person and her room exceedingly clean. Cleanliness is next to godliness was one slogan of maturity to which Lee Cherie could faithfully subscribe, not stopping to consider that if by the last quarter of the 20th century godliness wasn't next to something more interesting than godliness, it might be time to reevaluate our notions of godliness.